Hi, I'm Lyle. My fiance thought I was just an ordinary guy. Quiet, broke, nothing special. Her parents did too. Until the night they invited us to dinner, just to humiliate me. They called me useless. Her father laughed in my face, and when she stood up to protect me, her own mother slapped her. That's when I reached into my coat and placed something on the table that changed everything. They thought I was invisible, but silence, when used right, can burn louder than revenge. And that night, they learned who I really was, or thought they did. But the truth, that was just the beginning. My name is Lyle Renard. Folks in Charleston know my family. Old Southern money, loud opinions, and too much pride for their own good. I'm the youngest of 3 sons, the one no one expected much from. My brothers were born with the family's charm, my father with the family's wealth. I just had time and patience. When I was 25, I stopped waiting for their approval and started building something of my own. It began with a single construction project, just me, a rented truck, and a list of clients who wouldn't give me the time of day. I learned to stay quiet, to let results talk louder than introductions. Today, that small idea moves $700 million a month. But only I know that. Not my father, not my brothers, and not Clara. Clara Keene thinks I'm a modest contractor. I've never corrected her. When you've been measured by wealth your whole life, you start craving something money can't buy. She makes me feel like I exist, not as a name on a checkbook, but as a man who fixes his own fence and burns his toast on Sunday mornings. One afternoon, as the autumn sun turned the windows gold, Clara came by my workshop. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile people wear when they're bracing for bad news. "My parents want to have dinner with you," she said softly, tucking her hair behind her ear. "Tomorrow night." "Dinner?" I set down my wrench. That sounds civilized. "They can be difficult," she admitted. "My father, he's traditional." "Traditional," I repeated, smiling. "Means what? He keeps a shotgun by the door?" She laughed nervously. "More like, he has opinions about who deserves his daughter." I reached out, brushing her hand. "Then we'll just be ourselves. Truth doesn't need dressing up." She nodded, but I could feel her pulse quicken beneath my fingertips. And deep down, I already knew. Truth might not need dressing up. But some people can't stand to see it naked. The next evening, I drove to the Keene estate. The driveway curved between oaks draped in Spanish moss, each tree older than my entire business. The house loomed like a monument, white columns, marble steps, the smell of money that's never had to sweat. A butler opened the door before I could knock. "Mr. Renard, welcome." His tone was polite, his eyes calculating. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish and quiet judgment. A long dining table stretched across the room, candles flickering against silverware I couldn't afford even when I could afford anything. I took my seat beside Clara. A waiter placed a napkin folded like a leaf in front of me. I unfolded it, smoothing it into a simple crease. Evelyn Keene, Clara's mother, tilted her head and smiled thinly. "Oh, you're not much into presentation, are you?" "I just like things that make sense," I said, steady. She chuckled, that kind of laugh that tastes like perfume and dismissal. "Practical. How refreshing." Dinner began. Every question felt like a test I didn't sign up for. "So, Lyle," Marshall Keene said, carving into his steak, "what's your family's estate worth these days?" I met his eyes, polite but unbending. "I've built my own life. It's modest but honest." Evelyn's fork paused midair. "So, no old money?" Their laughter was quiet, refined, but it burned hotter than shouting. Clara's hand found mine under the table, trembling. Her thumb drew slow circles on my palm, her apology written in touch. The air grew heavier with every sip of wine. Their small talk turned into small cuts, jokes about working men and those who start from nothing. When dessert came, Marshall leaned back, swirling his drink. "A broke man like you wants to marry our daughter?" The room froze. Clara gasped, "Dad, that's enough!" The sound of her protest cracked the air. Then his hand struck her cheek. The slap echoed off the glass walls, sharp as lightning. For a second, I didn't breathe. Clara stumbled, and I caught her before she hit the floor. Her face was red where his hand had landed, her tears silent. I looked at Marshall. His jaw was tight, but there was something smug in his eyes. A man convinced he just put me in my place. Slowly, I helped Clara stand. The entire table watched. No one spoke. Then, without a word, I reached into my jacket and placed my black card on the table. The waiter's face drained of color. He stepped forward quickly. "Mr. Renard, sir, I didn't realize you were joining us tonight." Marshall's fork clattered. Evelyn's lips parted, but no sound came out. I turned to Marshall, my voice low, even. "You asked what my family's worth. Let's just say, enough to know manners can't be bought." I took Clara's hand, helping her walk out of that marble mausoleum. The night air outside was cool, clean, finally real. In the car, she stared out the window, silent. I wanted to hold her, to promise her something softer than this, but the truth hung between us like smoke. I never wanted them to see what I owned. I only wanted them to see who I was. But maybe, in this world, people only listen when money speaks first. That night, as we drove past the dark riverbanks of Charleston, my phone buzzed. Marshall Keene was calling, and it wasn't to apologize. When my phone rang that night, I was still driving Clara home. The screen flashed his name, Marshall Keene. My fingers tightened around the wheel. Clara looked at me, her eyes still swollen from crying. But I shook my head and let it ring until it stopped. He didn't leave a message, but I knew that silence wasn't mercy. It was calculation. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The city was quiet except for the hum of the tide and the distant creak of boats shifting in the harbor. I made coffee and sat outside on the pier, watching gulls fight over bits of bread left from tourists. For a few minutes, I let myself believe it was just another morning, that I was just another man with ordinary troubles. Inside, Clara was still asleep. She'd hardly said a word after last night, just curled up beside me, as if she could hide from her father's voice. I told her to rest, that I'd handle him if he called again. But as the sun began to lift over the water, my phone buzzed once more. Same name, same number. This time, I answered. "Lyle," Marshall said, his voice unusually smooth. "About last night. Emotions ran high. I may have spoken out of turn." I stared out at the horizon, saying nothing. "I think we should meet," he continued. "Man to man. My office, 11 o'clock. I'd like to clear the air." It wasn't an apology. It was a summons. His tone carried the same authority he used at the dinner table, but now it was dressed up as diplomacy. "Sure," I said quietly. "I'll be there." He paused, as if surprised I didn't argue. "Good. I appreciate that." When the call ended, I just sat there, the phone heavy in my hand. I'd dealt with men like him before. My father had been one. Men who confuse control with wisdom, who think generosity is a leash. By the time I drove downtown, the sky had brightened to a hard, clean blue. The Keene building towered over the historic district, glass and steel rising above brick and history. Inside, everything gleamed, mahogany, brass, the smell of polished ambition. The receptionist smiled too wide and led me upstairs. When I entered his office, Marshall was already standing by the window, a glass of bourbon in hand. "Lyle," he said, with the warmth of someone greeting a business partner, not a future son-in-law. "Good to see you." "Is it?" I replied, closing the door behind me. He chuckled. "You surprised me last night. That's rare. Most men would have stormed out." "I guess I'm not most men." He nodded approvingly, poured another drink, and gestured for me to sit. His office overlooked the harbor, the same one I'd been staring at earlier that morning. "I see potential in you," he said. "I think we got off on the wrong foot. Maybe there's a way for us to collaborate." "Collaborate?" He smiled faintly, like a professor humoring a slow student. "I'm opening a new property development in Mount Pleasant. Big project. You've got construction experience. I've got capital and political reach. We could make something profitable together." I let him talk. His words rolled smooth as his bourbon, but I could taste the motive. "You'd gain respect faster if you attached your name to ours," he added, leaning forward. That line. It was almost word for word what my father used to tell me before claiming credit for my work. I forced a small smile. "You mean, if I let you attach yours to mine?" He laughed, but his eyes stayed cold. Now, no need for pride. It's just business, son." The word son hit the air like poison. He slid a folder across the desk. "Take a look. Simple agreement. Mutually beneficial." I flipped it open. The fine print said everything he didn't. 18 months from signing, his firm would automatically hold controlling interest in my company's development branch. A quiet takeover disguised as partnership. I closed the folder gently. "You think I'm buying my way into your family, but what you're really doing is selling your soul for a share." He smiled, patient. "You're emotional. That's not good for business." I stood up, tucking the folder under my arm. "Then it's a good thing I'm not doing business." His jaw twitched, but he stayed seated, pretending to be unbothered. "You'll come around," he said. "Men like you always do. You just need to feel the pressure." "I've lived under pressure my whole life," I replied, walking toward the door. "That's what forged me." Outside, the sunlight felt sharper, almost metallic. I drove home in silence, letting the hum of the road drown out his voice, still echoing in my head. Clara was in the kitchen when I got back. She looked better, still pale, but calmer. She gave me a small smile. "Dad texted me," she said. "He said you two are patching things up." I didn't answer right away. I set the folder on the counter and leaned against it. "Clara," I said gently, "your father doesn't patch things up. He patches holes so he can sink the boat later." She frowned. "You're wrong about him. He's trying." "I hope you're right," I said. "But don't trust words that sound too polished." She studied me for a long moment. "You didn't sign anything, did you?" "No," I said, "but he'll find another way to make me wish I had." That night, I worked late in my study. The house was quiet, just the ticking of the old clock and the hum of the refrigerator down the hall. The folder sat unopened beside me. I was about to file it away when the phone rang again. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. A man's voice, low and cautious. "Mr. Renard." "Yes? Careful what you sign," he said. "He's done this before." "Who is this?" But the line had already gone dead. I stared at the phone, then at the folder. Slowly, I smiled, not with amusement, but recognition. This wasn't business. anymore. It was chess, and the next move wasn't mine. It was his, and he made it before sunrise. By the time I finished reading the anonymous text, the sky outside had started to shift from black to a bruised gray. The harbor was still and quiet, as if it knew something was coming. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew what a man like Marshall Keene did when he felt threatened. He didn't raise his voice. He raised hell. The storm broke just after dawn. My phone lit up before my first cup of coffee. Dozens of missed calls. Emails flooding in. My assistant's name flashing across the screen over and over. I tapped to answer. "Mr. Renard, have you seen the headlines?" I hadn't. Not yet. I opened my laptop, and there it was. Bold. Everywhere. Renard Group under investigation for fraudulent billing practices. Anonymous sources allege contractor misused city funds. Charleston's golden boy tarnished. I sat still for a second, letting the words sink in like cold water down the spine. Fabricated. Calculated. Executed to precision. They quoted sources close to the Keene family. They didn't say it outright, but the implication hung like a noose. Lyle Renard wasn't just under scrutiny, he was now a liability. By 9 a.m., my board demanded a meeting. The glass walls of the conference room gave off a reflection that looked like it belonged to someone else. My reflection, but blurred. Altered. A man accused of something he never did. My executives sat stiffly around the long table, shifting in their seats like kids caught in the principal's office. No one would look me in the eye. I stood at the head, hands steady on the back of a chair. "You've all seen the headlines," I said, "so let me make one thing clear. I built this company from the ground up. I never cut corners. I never stole a damn thing." Silence. No gasps, no rebuttals. Just silence. That's when I knew. They weren't standing with me. They were watching to see if I'd fall. I continued anyway. "If anyone here believes what they've read, walk out now." No one moved. But their silence wasn't loyalty. It was fear. The kind that grows in people when their paychecks feel threatened. When being associated with you might cost them. When the meeting ended, no one spoke. They just filed out quietly, eyes down. Later that afternoon, I was in my office trying to focus, trying to breathe through the weight, when Clara walked in, her face pale, her arms crossed like she was holding herself together. "My father says you're being investigated," she said. I didn't respond. I waited. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice breaking. Did you do something wrong, Lyle?" That question hit harder than any headline ever could. Not because she doubted me, but because I could see in her eyes that she didn't want to. I got up slowly, walked to her, and took her hands in mine. "No," I said. "I didn't." She nodded, a shaky breath escaping her lips. "Then why aren't you saying anything? Why aren't you fighting back?" I looked her in the eyes. "Because yelling into a storm doesn't stop the rain. I'm not going to scream my innocence into a room full of people who've already decided I'm guilty. Not yet." She leaned into me, and for a moment, we just stood there, quiet, unmoving. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know," I said. "Me too." After she left, I opened my laptop and got to work. No press statement, no media circus. I started digging. Every article led back to vague claims, always a close source or an internal consultant, but one detail stood out. Each leak traced to a holding company with ties to Keene family investors. I hired a private investigator. 3 hours later, I had my first breadcrumb, a chain of shell accounts. One of them, registered under a dummy name, was linked to a former PR consultant who just happened to be on Marshall Keene's payroll 2 years ago. He wasn't careful. That's the thing with powerful men. They think they're untouchable. They don't hide things. They just bury them, assuming no one will dig. Clara called again that night. She sounded exhausted. "He said you were going to blame him," she whispered. "He said you'd try to ruin him." "I'm not trying to ruin anyone," I said, "but I won't be buried either." She was quiet for a long time, then softly, "What are you going to do?" I paused. "Nothing," I said. "Just watch." Later, I sat at my desk alone. The city had gone dark outside, the only light coming from the blinking modem and my phone on the edge of the desk. I was rereading a chain of transactions, links between Marshall's investment firm and a fake consultant, when my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I answered. "Mr. Renard," the same low voice said. "He's planning something public. Sunday dinner. Don't skip it." Click. I sat back in my chair, staring at the shadows on the ceiling. The same dinner table, the same family. But this time, I wasn't coming as a guest. I was coming with eyes wide open. Sunday came faster than I thought, and so did the storm. The city simmered under a heavy blanket of late summer heat. Even the air had weight to it, like the kind that settles before something breaks. I was out on the porch, coffee cooling beside me, when Clara called. Her voice was too soft to be casual. "Mom wants to apologize," she said. "Dad, too. They want us to come to dinner." I didn't answer right away. She waited. "Please, Lyle, I think they really want to make things right." Her words trembled with hope, but I could hear the fear hiding beneath it. She wasn't asking for trust. She was begging for a second chance at peace. Maybe for herself more than for me. I told her I'd be there. By 6:30 that evening, I pulled into the long gravel driveway of the Keene estate. The mansion looked just as it had the first night. Too clean, too polished, like it had been scrubbed of anything human. The front porch lights glowed in that golden magazine cover kind of way, but the warmth felt artificial, and it didn't reach the air. Inside, everything was staged. The dining room was set like a mirror of the last dinner. Candles lit, wine glasses in perfect rows. The silverware gleamed under chandelier light. Even the napkins had been folded into the same delicate leaf shape. I took my seat in silence, unfolded my napkin, flattened it with my palm, and creased it once. Simple. Honest. Marshall glanced my way but said nothing. Evelyn greeted me with a brittle smile, her pearls hanging stiff on her collarbone like they were holding her together. "Let's not dwell on the past," she said. "We're all family now." Family. That word in her voice felt more like a threat than a comfort. Clara sat beside me, stiff but hopeful, like someone bracing for waves they still hoped wouldn't crash. Dinner began, again. This time, Evelyn announced they decided to record the evening for family memory. A camera had been discreetly placed across the room, its red light almost invisible unless you were looking for it. But I was. I noticed the way the waiter adjusted the lens mid-meal, how Marshall kept angling his chair just right. "Lyle," Marshall said, lifting his glass, "I hear your company's doing quite well. Impressive for someone without old connections." I kept my expression still. I knew this game. Bait me into defending myself, then twist it into arrogance. "We do all right," I said, nodding. He smirked, disappointed I didn't bite. The conversation stayed cordial. Too cordial. The kind of politeness that bruises more than it calms. I watched the way Evelyn kept nudging Clara to smile. watched the way Marshall's compliments came wrapped in subtle cuts. Halfway through the meal, Marshall raised his glass again. "A toast," he said, "to my daughter, for standing by a man she's still getting to know." Clara's fork clinked against her plate. She sat up straighter. "Dad," she whispered, "don't." But he continued, louder now. "May her loyalty never cost her more than her pride." Evelyn laughed softly, not the warm kind, but the kind that twists. I caught movement near the camera, a red blink, live. They were filming me, waiting, hoping I'd explode, that I'd give them exactly the drama they could spin into a story, one that'd make me look like the unstable outsider they always wanted me to be. I didn't say a word, but my fists clenched under the table. Then Clara stood. "Stop it," she snapped. "This isn't reconciliation, it's humiliation." "Clara, sit down," Evelyn barked. "No," Clara said, her voice sharp. "You want him to crack. You want me to beg. You're not apologizing. You're staging a performance." The room went still. Marshall's eyes narrowed, and then Evelyn slapped her. Hard. The sound rang across the room, louder than it should have in a house like that. Clara staggered a step back, one hand to her cheek, but I didn't reach out this time. I let the moment breathe. The camera light kept blinking. Marshall paled. His posture shifted, like he just realized the wrong script had played. I stood, calmly, pushed my chair in, looked at Evelyn. "You did it again," I said, quiet enough to make them strain to hear. "And this time, the whole world will see it." Clara didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just walked toward me. I took her hand. We left without looking back. No shouting. No final words. Just the silence of a house that finally understood who was holding the mirror. Outside, Clara trembled beside me. "They'll twist it," she said. "They'll say I provoked her." "They won't get the chance," I replied. "They recorded it, and so did I." I tapped the small recorder in my pocket. I'd seen the camera being adjusted. I knew their tricks, but I had mine too. The air outside felt different now. Not lighter, not yet, but clearer, because this time they gave me their mask, and I had proof of the face behind it. By the next morning, their performance was viral, but not the way they expected. I woke before the sun broke over the harbor, rolled over in bed, and reached for my phone. It was already buzzing. Dozens of missed calls. Notifications stacked like bricks. The video had exploded online. The title said it all. Charleston elite couple. Humiliate daughter and fiancé on camera. Within hours, it was everywhere. Local stations ran the clip before the morning weather. National anchors debated it over coffee. But it wasn't the headlines that struck me. It was the comments. Thousands of them. This is what silence looks like when it has nothing left to prove. The man didn't need to raise his voice. He won the room by not syncing with them. We've all had a Marshall Keene in our lives. And just like that, I became the man who said nothing. Clara sat beside me on the couch, wrapped in a sweatshirt 2 sizes too big. She hadn't said much since last night. Her eyes were red, not from crying, but from staying up, watching it all unfold, frame by painful frame. She whispered, "I never wanted them ruined." I looked at her, soft but firm. "You didn't ruin them. Truth did." By noon, Marshall was scrambling. Their PR team issued a shaky statement. He called the video manipulated. Evelyn, appearing on a local news segment, cried on cue, saying she'd been emotionally baited. But the raw footage, time-stamped, unedited, pulled straight from their own dining room, had already been verified by 3 independent sources. The internet wasn't buying the act this time. As the Keens clung to denial, I kept quiet. Not a tweet, not a press release, just let it breathe. But I knew better than to think Marshall would stay cornered. He's the type who fights dirtiest when he's losing. That afternoon, my company's general counsel burst into my office with a thick folder in hand. "You need to see this," he said. Marshall had leaked documents to the press, forged agreements, doctored audits, all painted to look like I'd been funneling money through shell corporations, evading taxes for years. It was a calculated move, not meant to win, just to smear. But he was late to the game. 2 days before all this began, I'd sat across from Eli Navarro at a quiet bar just off Market Street. Eli's an investigative journalist with a nose for corruption and a history of putting powerful men in handcuffs. He'd been following the Keens for nearly a year. Land deals, offshore holdings, political donations that smelled like bribes. I'd given him what he needed: recorded conversations, internal ledgers, and a very real paper trail that Marshall never thought anyone could find. And now, with Marshall throwing punches in the dark, Eli had what he needed to step into the light. Around 5 p.m., my phone rang. It was Eli. "You were right," he said. "Offshore accounts. Cayman. His name's on them. Bashas. This just went federal." That evening, the story flipped again. Headlines changed. Keen family under federal investigation. Anonymous tip leads to financial fraud probe. Suddenly, I wasn't the man under attack. I was the man who didn't flinch when the knives came out. Clara turned off the TV and looked at me. "You planned this, didn't you?" she asked. I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. "I just stopped pretending to lose." We sat there for a while, in that rare quiet that comes not from peace, but from clarity. The storm wasn't over, but the sky had cracked enough to let light in. Then, my phone vibrated again. A single message from the same anonymous number that had warned me before. "You think you've won. You don't know what he's capable of." No name, no reply. I walked to the window. The harbor was still, dark, almost too calm. And in that stillness, I felt something else. Not fear, not exactly, but the sense that the final card hadn't been played yet. The Keens were falling, but the game was still on the board. I should have slept, but sleep felt useless, like closing my eyes would let someone move pieces while I wasn't watching. Midnight blurred into early morning when my phone buzzed with a terse building alert. Motion detected in Suite 14B. The timestamp read 11:46 p.m. I drove in a cold sweat. The streets were nearly empty. Charleston hushed under a thin moon. At the office, the lobby security guard looked as surprised as I felt. The outer door was ajar, unforced. No broken glass, no panic. Just a precision someone had practiced. Inside, the place smelled faintly of ozone and coffee left too long on a burner. My team's desks sat where they always did, screens dark, a paperweight here, a framed photo tilted slightly there. At first glance, nothing was missing. Then Mara's desk, her half-drunk coffee, the sticky note with a client number. Everything seemed normal until I remembered where I kept the encrypted drive. It wasn't in the drawer. Not stolen for profit, I realized. Stolen for leverage. My heart didn't race. Anger did. Not the hot, flailing kind, but a deliberate narrowing of focus. Someone had come in for one thing: the drive containing the originals, the contracts, the offshore trails, the recordings tying the Keen Circle to accounts they never expected anyone to follow. Only a handful of people knew it existed. Only one person besides me knew the exact hiding spot. I called Mara. No answer. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her desk light was on, screen locked. Her laptop was gone. Mara Voss had been with me since the company was a 3-person operation. She'd closed more late deals than I could count. She knew where I kept things because she'd helped me put the locker together that first winter we were scraping by. She knew when to call, what to say, and how to calm a tense boardroom. Trust felt like an old coat, comfortable, familiar. Now it lay at the bottom of a laundry pile of doubt. I paced the office until dawn painted the harbor gray. I told myself there could be other explanations. Maybe she'd been pressured, maybe coerced, but every rationalization sounded like desperation. An hour later, an anonymous email landed in my inbox with the subject line, "Check your newsfeed." Attached was a memo, my signature forged at the bottom, authorizing false financial statements. The forger had done a careful job. The font matched. The formatting was plausible. The dates aligned. Someone wanted to make the story tidy in print. Lyle Renard, architect of a fraud. Marshall wasn't content to nudge rumors. He'd escalated to surgical blows. First, the public humiliation at dinner, then doctored documents, and now a theft inside my own walls. He'd found his foot soldier, but there was a pattern in sloppy hands. When people panic, they repeat mistakes. The forged memo had a small tell, an abbreviation in the footer that my systems never used. It was the kind of thing an insider would include without thinking. Marshall's team had a method: place the blame, wait for the crack to form, then prod until someone fell through. I called Eli. He had been a steady presence, quieter than a headline, but sharper than most legal teams. "I need every copy you have of the Keene Trail," I said, "and see who accessed Mara's laptop last." He answered quickly. We pinged a device. Mara's phone was at Keene Holdings headquarters an hour after midnight. He paused. "And there's more. Someone accessed the backup server using a credential tied to her login." Mara's chair sat cold and empty while the rest of the world heated up. I could feel a betrayal, ironic, bitter, like drinking bad coffee because you trusted the barista. But my anger was tempered by calculation. Betrayal is useful if you know how to mine it for truth. I called her again until her voicemail finally picked up. When she called back, her voice was thin. "Lyle, I didn't want this to happen." "Where are you?" I asked. Keene called me. They asked questions. They said they would protect my job if I helped them verify some internal audits. They said it was the only way to keep the company from collapsing. I panicked. Panic is contagious. So is guilt. She said she'd been threatened with losing health benefits, and someone had shown her photos, things out of context, and implied they'd go public. She cried when she told me, a quick private sound that broke something in the room around me. "You were scared," I said, not as excuse, but as truth. "They used fear. They used you." She whispered, "I didn't take it to him. I left at 1. I swear I left." Eli's tracing suggested otherwise. Her phone location had pinged Keene HQ twice after her stated departure time. Either she'd gone back, or someone else had used her credentials. Both possibilities tasted like defeat. They weren't only trying to ruin me publicly anymore. They wanted to erase the evidence that could convict them. That made their assault existential, no longer about pride, but survival. I sat in my office and watched the city wake. The harbor ferries skated across black water. Delivery trucks rumbled. Offices lit up like match heads. Somewhere, the Keene machine churned, preparing another blow. By mid-morning, we were rebuilding from the ash. Eli deployed sources, pulling together archived emails, mirrored copies, every forgotten printout from conferences. I called a trusted board member and explained quietly that the forged memo was a setup. "We'll show the trail," I told him, "but we'll need patience, and we'll need to control the narrative when it hits." Control is a tricky word. It's not stopping the river, it's carving where the water runs. We set to work, reconstructing file histories, asking for server logs, subpoenaing timestamps. The team moved like an orchestra tuning, each instrument finding its place. Late that afternoon, I stood in Mara's empty office and realized the most painful betrayal was not that she may have cooperated, but that someone had convinced her betrayal was the only option. That level of manipulation was Marshall's real weapon. Not money, not reputation, but the turning of people into tools. Eli poked his head in with fresh intel. "They're planning to publish tomorrow," he said. "Front page. They want to make your death by headline irreversible." I looked at him, tired but resolved. "Then let them print. We'll have our own documents ready by dawn. If they want to play with front pages, give them a front page confession." He laughed, a short, incredulous sound. "Bold, even for you." "Marshall made a choice the day he decided to break into my office," I said. "He broadened the war to include theft. That means he misjudged the cost of escalation. People make mistakes when they think desperation will save them." That night, as I locked my apartment and walked Clara to the car, the normal rhythms of the city seemed off. People passed on the sidewalks, unaware of the quiet war behind the glass towers. A child chased a balloon. A couple argued softly about dinner plans. Life moved on, resilient and unaware. I checked my phone. Another anonymous text glowed on the screen. "Tomorrow's paper, front page." No sign-off, no remorse. I turned the message over in my head like a coin. They wanted me buried in ink, but headlines fade. Paper gets recycled. Truth, if arranged with patience and precision, can make that ink look like a smear. I slept badly, rising with a plan. We would rebuild the evidence, reconstitute the files, and expose the hand that had reached into my office. They had stolen one drive, but they had underestimated redundancy, witnesses, backups, hidden in places they never considered. They had underestimated the stubbornness of someone who had spent years building quietly. They thought they were running a clever play. They forgot. The person they targeted had learned to watch while others shouted. By dawn, their story hit every newsstand in the city. Bold headline, neat lies. The paper smelled of ink and confidence. But while Charleston read the fabrication, Eli released a thread online with timestamps, original recordings, bank transfers, and a short note. "Follow the money. Start with Keen Holdings." The first wave of truth crashed into their theater of denial, loud, fast, and devastating. But by sunrise, the Keens had already moved to plug the breach. They didn't stop to lick their wounds. They retaliated, fast and clean, like people who had played this game before. When I opened my eyes that morning, Clara was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, phone glowing in her hand. Her shoulders were still, but her fingers trembled. "They did it," she said, without looking up. I reached for my own phone and saw the headline, stamped across every major outlet. Tech CEO Lyle Ransom accused of corporate fraud. Photos of me walking out of my building were paired with screenshots of doctored documents. My name was now swimming in a whirlpool of accusations, as if the internet had voted and decided I was guilty before breakfast. Talk shows labeled me the manipulator. Analysts predicted a nosedive in my company's shares. Some clients began pulling appointments without saying a word. That was always the way it started, not with confrontation, but silence. Clara put the phone down. They're destroying everything you built. Only if I let them finish the story, I said, voice calm. By late morning, I learned Marshall Keene had scheduled a press conference at the downtown Hyatt ballroom. The media was calling it a truth session. His PR team billed it as a moment of moral courage. I knew it was a performance. I wasn't invited. Of course not. But Eli was, press badge and all. "Don't blink," he texted me. "I'll stream it to you directly." I watched from my office, the blinds drawn halfway. The screen flickered to life, showing Marshall behind a podium that looked more like a pulpit. The Keene family crest sat on the backdrop like a wax seal of righteousness. Marshall wore his politician's face, earnest, humble, lethal. He cleared his throat and began, "We're here today not to gloat, but to clarify. The public deserves transparency." He held up a folder, my company letterhead, my alleged signature. "These documents prove," he said, "that our family was targeted by someone willing to manipulate truth, business, and bloodlines." He paused for effect. That's when Eli's message pinged again. "It's live. It's working." On the projection screen behind Marshall, the slideshow glitched. The next slide loaded, but it wasn't his. Instead, we heard Marshall's voice, recorded clean and unmistakable. "We'll frame him with those papers. Just make sure Mara gets paid first," another voice followed, Evelyn's. "And Clara never finds out." Gasps rippled through the room like broken glass. The screen split. Text messages, audio logs, internal memos all started rolling in a curated sequence. Eli's digital Trojan horse had kicked the gates open. A counter-performance was underway, one they hadn't prepared for. The view count on the private stream surged. 60,000, 100,000, 600,000 within minutes. Marshall stood frozen. The mask cracked, not from anger, but from calculation undone. Reporters stirred like a tide changing direction. "Mr. Keene, did you authorize falsification? Mrs. Keene, were you aware of the bribery?" Microphones lunged forward like weapons. Security guards tried to shut down the projector, but it was too late. Eli had streamed the footage live across 5 major platforms and backed it to cloud storage before the second slide had even finished loading. Evelyn's face twisted as she hissed at a guard to cut the feed. The guard hesitated. Maybe he saw what I did. People with too many secrets are never worth protecting. My phone buzzed again. Eli's message. "It's over." But I knew it wasn't. Not until I showed up. I left the office with nothing but my coat and my voice. 15 minutes later, I walked into the ballroom, unnoticed at first. The crowd had turned chaotic, journalists shouting questions into the void. But then someone recognized me, and the sea parted. No one stopped me. I walked right to the front. Marshall looked at me, pale, like someone had drained his years of bluster through a crack in the floor. "You think this proves anything?" he barked, chest rising with the last puff of arrogance he had left. I didn't raise my voice, didn't need to. "It proves you should have never taught your daughter to hit the wrong people." Gasps again, this time sharper. Clara's slap, Evelyn's slap, both now immortalized in digital permanence. The metaphor hit harder because it was real. Then I turned to the press. My silence wasn't guilt, it was restraint, and now you've seen why. Microphones caught every word. Cameras did too. I didn't need to shout. I just stood, solid and still, while the room spun around me. Outside, Clara stood by the valet area, hands in her coat pockets. Reporters circled but didn't approach her. Something in her posture said not now. She looked up as I approached. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I had to finish it," I answered. "Not for revenge, for peace." She didn't say anything back, just nodded, eyes full but steady. As we turned to walk, I reached into my coat and felt the folded napkin, the same one I'd unconsciously kept since that first humiliating dinner. I pulled it out. It slipped from my hand and floated to the ground, landing like a spent leaf on the pavement. No wind picked it up. No one stepped on it. It just lay there, useless now, and finally at rest. The napkin hadn't meant anything to anyone else, but to me, it had always been a quiet symbol of everything I'd swallowed. And now, as Clara and I walked away from the courthouse steps, it felt like something had finally broken free inside me. But freedom has a strange echo. It doesn't ring with applause. It hums in stillness. Charleston that night was muted. The chaos that had buzzed across airwaves all week now seemed distant, like static from another time. The harbor was calm, the moonlight throwing soft shadows across the cobblestones. I walked alone, needing the night air. The Keens were finished, at least publicly. Their accounts were frozen, federal investigations now marching through what was left of their empire. Evelyn hadn't shown her face since the press conference. Marshall had retreated into silence, probably trying to figure out which friend still answered his calls. And yet, as I stood watching the tide roll in, I felt no victory. The same salt in the air reminded me of the night I first met Clara, of how young she'd looked under those dockside lights, of how much hope she'd had that her family could be better than what she feared. I whispered to myself, winning doesn't always sound like applause. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. An email, no subject line, just a single line of text. "Meet me at the courthouse. One last thing you should see. Mara Voss." I hesitated. Then I turned and walked, each step echoing down the quiet streets of the old district. The courthouse loomed at the end of Broad Street, bathed in amber light. She was already there, sitting on the stone steps like a student waiting for detention. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but like someone who had aged a year for every hour of regret. "I figured you'd come," she said softly. I stayed where I was. They threatened me. Marshall, Evelyn. They made it sound like if I didn't take the drive, something would happen to my brother. He just got out of the hospital. I panicked. I didn't speak. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Lyle. I made a copy of everything. Even one video no one's seen yet." She reached into her coat and handed me a flash drive. I took it without a word. Inside the car, parked a block away, I plugged the drive into my laptop. There, grainy and time-stamped, was Marshall. Alone, slouched in his leather chair, glass in hand. The camera had clearly been left recording by accident. He was muttering into his phone, slurring slightly. "She's just like her mother, loyal until she's not. They all break when money talks." He wasn't talking about Clara. He was talking about Evelyn. I watched the clip twice. Then I closed the lid. That was the final piece I hadn't seen. Not just how he treated his daughter or his colleagues, but his own wife. Evelyn, the woman who'd slapped Clara for showing resistance, had been suffering in silence herself, and suddenly, everything about her brittle smiles and rehearsed words made sense. The rot hadn't started with Marshall. It had been growing for generations. He'd simply mastered the performance. I looked at Mara, waiting nervously beside the car. "You could leak it," she said. "Take him all the way down. Humiliate them." I thought about it. Instead, I said, "No one needs to see another broken soul. Not her. Not Clara. Next morning, I handed the drive to Eli. Bury it, I told him. He looked at me for a long second. You sure? Public vengeance feels good for a day. Then it poisons you. I didn't need another headline. Clara didn't need her father's legacy shoved in her face again. And Mara, well, forgiveness had to start somewhere. Weeks passed. The Keene estate went up for auction. Bidders arrived in polished shoes and polite smiles, circling the property like scavengers circling a still-warm carcass. Clara and I stood just beyond the gate, watching the signs come down. You could have destroyed them completely, she said, her voice unreadable. That's what they wanted, I replied, to make me one of them. She smiled faintly and slipped her hand into mine. There were no cameras that day, no reporters hounding for reactions, just a quiet wind moving through the moss-covered oaks. We turned back toward the car, steps slow, matching each other. As I slid behind the wheel and glanced at the rearview mirror, something caught my eye. On the porch railing of the now empty mansion, just barely visible from the street, was a small square of white. I narrowed my eyes. The napkin, folded the same way as always. Someone had placed it there, not dropped, not forgotten, deliberate. Clara hadn't seen it yet. I didn't mention it. As we drove off, I kept my eyes on the road and let the silence sit between us. Not heavy, not haunting, just present. Peace, I whispered, but never forget. 6 months passed. Charleston slipped into autumn quietly, the kind of quiet that carries a chill but also a strange comfort. The city looked softer now. The chaos of last winter had faded into whispers. Even the harbor seemed calmer, as if it too had earned the right to rest. Clara and I had settled into something steady, something real. We ran a small foundation together. One that offered loans and mentorship to small business owners who'd once been overlooked, just like I had been. No interviews, no headlines, just work. Honest work. Each morning, I walked down to the edge of the dock with a cup of coffee and watched the sunlight climb the water. It was a simple ritual, one that reminded me of what silence could mean when it wasn't born from pain. That's when the envelope arrived. It was a Thursday morning, cool, breezy, the kind of morning where even the mail felt lighter. Among the bills and pamphlets sat a plain white envelope with no return address. The handwriting was careful, the ink slightly faded, but the signature at the bottom froze me in place. Evelyn. Inside, a folded napkin. The same kind of leaf-pressed linen from that dinner, and a single-page letter written in looping cursive. I unfolded it slowly. I watched the video. I saw the slap, the shame, the look in my daughter's eyes. For the first time, I saw myself. I didn't hate you, Lyle. I hated what you reminded me of. A man who could be good without needing to prove it. Marshall taught me that silence was weakness. You showed me silence can be strength. I'm leaving Charleston. But before I go, I wanted to give this back to you. When I tilted the envelope, a small pressed leaf slipped out and landed in my palm. Brittle, delicate, perfectly intact. Clara came up behind me, towel still draped over her shoulder from washing dishes. What's that? I handed her the letter. She read it quietly, lips moving slightly as her eyes traced the words. By the time she reached the end, she stood there for a while, letter trembling just a little in her fingers. She never said sorry, she whispered. She didn't need to, I said. The leaf was her apology. We stood by the window for a long moment, just watching the boats drift in the distance. I folded the letter again and slid it between the pages of an old book on the shelf. Not to hide it, not to display it, just to keep it somewhere peaceful. Some battles aren't meant to be won. They're meant to be understood. A week later, the trees along the harbor began to turn. Gold, amber, the color of endings that didn't sting. Clara and I decided to walk by the water that evening, the same stretch where everything once began. The tide was low, the sun melting into the horizon like slow honey. She slipped her hand into mine. Do you ever miss the noise? I thought about it, about boardrooms, cameras, and the sharp hum of reputation, about the weight of silence that once felt like defeat. I shook my head. Silence taught me who I was, she smiled. Then maybe that's what love really is, knowing when to speak and when to stay quiet. We walked without another word. At the end of the pier, I stopped and reached into my jacket pocket. The folded napkin was still there. Though time had softened its creases, I opened it, feeling the worn fabric between my fingers. Then I placed the pressed leaf inside and let both drift into the water. The tide caught it gently, carrying it outward. The ripples spread wide, slow, and endless. Some stories don't end with applause, I murmured. They end with stillness, and stillness is enough. The last light of the sun disappeared behind the horizon, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence. It spoke perfectly for itself.